Hello everyone, my name's Andrew Middleton and welcome to this presentation about meeting the Inclusion Manager at the International School, Seychelles. So just very quickly, a little bit about my background. I've been teaching for 13 years. Previously to moving to the Seychelles, I was an assistant head teacher at two different large special schools in Birmingham in the UK. I've got a Master's in Inclusion and Special Needs from the University of Birmingham. I've got a real passion for inclusion and working cooperatively with families, with young people, with staff to maximise the benefits of our learners. And I like to think I've got a good knowledge of different conditions from working in different special schools and how they impact learning and some ideas for strategies to try and help overcome them. So I've been at the school now for 3 weeks, and in that time I've met the inclusion team during staff preparation week. Really excited, really enthused to meet them. I can tell that they share my passion for inclusion. I'm looking forward to working with all of them. We did some inclusion training for all the educational staff during that preparation week. Part of this included getting a shared understanding of the term inclusion so we can all know what we're working towards. Did some work on quality first teaching, what that looks like, and some different ideas on how inclusion can start with the differentiation and the resources used by the teacher. We spoke about the barriers that currently exist at ISS to inclusion so that I can start working to overcome those barriers. We've also tried to ensure the timetables, the classrooms, and the assessment tools that we're using are appropriate, and started to write an inclusion policy that reflects the work that we're trying to do. So I just want to talk to you about the principles of inclusion at ISS. We have a culture of acceptance, diversity, and inclusion in all regards. So whether that's as an international school, the wide range of nationalities and backgrounds that we have in our students or in our staff, or the range of needs and strengths that we've got in our student population. We want to remove any factor that might prevent or impede learning. So whether that's to do with the environment or the resources we use or the way that activities are delivered. As a team, we want to make sure that all of our learners are able to learn. We want to avoid pupils having their self-worth diminished. So mental well-being, happiness is very important. If young people don't feel safe and secure at school, they're not going to learn. So that's really important. We want pupils to understand the rights of all people to live freely and without discrimination, both in the school, in their community, and in the wider world when they move on. I just want to talk you through the structure of the inclusion team at ISS. So there's myself as inclusion manager, and I work closely with all the people here on this diagram. So in our primary department, Mrs. Tenegay is the primary inclusion coordinator. She's also one of the SEN teaching assistants. She works with Miss Annabelle, who's an SEN teacher, and Miss Lorna, who's also an SEN teacher, and then Mrs. Sarah is one of our teaching assistants in primary. In the secondary team, I act as the secondary inclusion coordinator. And in secondary, we've got Miss Marie Rose, who is an SEN teacher in English, Miss Pamela, who's also an SEN teacher in English, and Miss Mavis, also an SEN teacher in English. In maths, we've got an SEN teacher, Mr. Bertram, and this year we've got 2 teaching assistants specifically in secondary, which is Miss Vanessa and Miss Valerie. All of those staff work across different subjects. It's not just English and maths. They work with small groups, with individuals, with young people for who English is an additional language also. Also in the inclusion team, there's our counsellors. So in primary, we've got Miss Kate, and in secondary, we've got Miss Myrna. And Kate and Myrna are also child protection officers. And also in the inclusion team is our medical staff. So our head nurse, Miss Natalie, works with Miss Lydia, who's our school nurse. And we all work together. We all meet weekly to discuss inclusion and how each of our roles interrelates, and how we can support all the young people we work with in their learning, in their health, and in their well-being. These are some of the different ways we use assessment at ISS in terms of inclusion. So we'll always use different assessments depending on the specific situation. The CAT4 test is something that's used for all students in certain year groups. So in years 3, 5, 7, 10 and 13. All students will do a CAT4 test. There is a cost which is paid for by parents, but this test reveals any hidden potential or any learning needs by assessing the young people's reasoning skills. These are actually happening next week. They happen in school, and then we share the results with all staff and with parents, so that we can see where they're at and what their needs are. For students doing exams, some will need some access arrangements put into place, so these have to be applied quite a bit before they sit the exam. The CAT4 results can be used as a good indicator, and then each of the exam boards have their own tests and their own application process, which we coordinate as a school. And then we'll do specific screening if there's needs that are emerging, such as dyslexia, speech and language, reading, processing skills, or memory. And these are not diagnoses as such, but they do give us a really good idea of if any of these conditions might be prominent and affecting learning, and then we'll know some of the strategies we can use to try and help the learners overcome whatever those needs are. So this next section just explains English as an additional language, or EAL. So EAL students are those learners whose first language is not English. And obviously at ISS, that's the vast majority of our students. A lot of our students' first language is Creole. So they are coming to school and learning in English, which is not their first language. We also have students from all over the world that come with a different understanding and a different level of English. So we do have a lot of students at ISS who would be classed as EAL. As I said, each individual will have their specific strengths and areas to work on. And our aim for all of those young people is to ensure that they can become bilingual learners, so that they are learning in English and they're also able to speak their first language. And by learning English and understanding English, they can access all areas of the curriculum. If English isn't there when they first join ISS, we try and do some intensive work early on so that they can understand English, they can achieve in lots of different subjects, and they can understand what's going on, and they can socialise, which is really important. And this year, Miss Mavis in secondary is trialling a GCSE, an international GCSE, in EAL, which is run by Cambridge, for the first time next summer. So we will monitor that. We will get the results and we'll speak to the young people and see if that's a good outcome for the young people that maybe join us late or in Key Stage 4 that for whom an English GCSE would be very difficult to achieve because they haven't got that deep understanding of English when they get to their exams. So as I said before, I'm fairly new to the role, but from meeting the inclusion team, meeting the young people, speaking to the rest of the school, these are some of the priorities we've identified. So the barriers that staff and young people have identified, we want to start by overcoming them in terms of inclusion. We want to improve the use of any diagnostic testing that we're using and make observations useful and constructive for the young people and for the staff that work with them. I want to make sure that EAL is separated from any additional or special needs that are identified, because they are all three quite different. So we need to be clear what we're talking about when we're trying to include the young people and what's the root of their difficulty. We want to implement our inclusion policy, so we've started writing that policy. The next step after that will be to implement it, make sure all staff understand it. We want to increase the work we do with any outside agencies to develop our own provision, and eventually run some parental workshops now that we can again, sharing ideas, networking, just increasing the way that school and families can work together to improve our inclusion. So as with all aspects of school life, communication is really, really important in terms of inclusion. So there's information about our team and our aims and what we do in both the primary and the secondary handbook, which has been shared with all families. Messages and information will be shared on ISAMS, so make sure we have up-to-date email addresses, phone numbers, so that we can talk to each other about inclusion. The form or the class tutor is your first point of contact for any general concerns with learning or behaviour. And then if there is something a bit more specific with regards to additional needs or EAL, then families in primary should contact Mrs. Tenegay, the primary coordinator, and anyone in secondary should contact myself. We'd be happy to talk through the needs and talk through some ideas on how to move forward. So I just wanted to finish on a slide with some further information about some of the things that I've spoken about. So quality first teaching is general teaching ideas and strategies that all staff can employ to try and make learning more inclusive. EAL, English as an additional language, there's an organisation called NALDIC who provide further information and training on that specific need. And then the Cat 4 testing that I spoke about is run by GL Assessment, and they've got a website there which explains the test in a bit more detail and how it can be useful. Thank you ever so much for listening, and I look forward to working with you all soon.